Hi, Jamie. Thanks for being here. Some familiar faces.
Yeah, for sure. Look how timely everyone is.
Someone pouring out. Oh, it's Stefan pouring out the wine with the Corvin there. Bravo, sir.
Here, I'm going to unmute Jamie here. Jamie, you were muted, but now you're unmuted.
All good. I'm just stoked to be here. Thanks for giving me a little opportunity. Fired up to hang out with you guys for a bit.
Yeah, we're excited too. So welcome everyone. We're going to give people a few minutes to get here and settle in. We find it takes people a minute or two. But while we're getting started, I'm going to throw up a poll for you guys to take, so we learn a little bit about what you currently think about Pinot Noir, if you've had any of these wines before, and all that good stuff, and what you're sipping on too.
Yeah.
Because we like to know what you're sipping on. And we'll get started in a few minutes.
What? What's your current feeling about Pinot Noir, Jake?
The blink?
Feeling about Pinot Noir?
What do you mean? People are answering. Maybe your poll is just doing something weird.
I don't get to take.
Hi, Michelle.
Am I supposed to sit here?
Here, let's share this space here. Both of them, right?
Hey, Lane. Hey, Brooks.
Okay, we're here. Okay, yeah, come on over.
I'm back.
Good to see you again, Taryn.
That one's Portland.
Jenna. Great. Look at all those beautiful faces. I love it.
Ooh, David, I like that background. That's sharp.
Where? Where?
Right there.
Oh, yeah. Nice vineyard background. Michael has a nice background too going on
Hey,
here.
look at that.
You get to like make a fake background, right?
Hey, I know those guys. What's happening, Marlene? Hi, folks.
That's a brother-in-law.
All dressed up for Yeah, you can see I got all dressed up.
This is the first time I've worn a button-down shirt. Well, I guess since last week's.
That's part of the fun. I get to like put jewelry on and stuff for like
Play and dress
a minute.
up.
All right, everyone, we're gonna get started. We have about 23 people here, so we're gonna get started. If you're just joining, we would love it if you could take the poll so we kind of have an understanding of where you're at with Pinot, if you've ever tried any of these great winemakers before. And then also maybe throw in the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to know where you're joining from, what you're sipping on, all that good stuff. And
so just a brief introduction.
Yeah.
I'm Evan. I'm a certified sommelier and certified cider professional and bespoke wine tour guide. And
I'm Suzanne. I'm the founder of the Crafty Cask, and the Crafty Cask is all about celebrating and supporting craft alcohol makers like Laura and Jamie from Whetstone and Carpenter, who are joining us here tonight. Give us a wave, everyone.
yeah, so if you find Laura with her husband Jake there, and then Jamie's got a backwards hat on.
Yeah, exactly. So those are our featured makers for the evening, and we'll be giving them most of the airtime.
Yep.
But we are, first, we're going to do a little rundown just to get everyone familiar, because we really, really want this to be two-way conversation. We want this to be engaging. We want this to be fun. We don't want this to be like some of the other platforms where you're really just watching someone, you know, kind of talk the whole time. That's not what we're here for. We're here to talk, and because it's a really fun opportunity for you guys to get to actually talk to the winemakers themselves, ask them questions, learn about the process, all of that kind of fun stuff.
And these guys have some great stories. I tell you what, you're in for a treat tonight.
Yeah, we've definitely, Jamie's done some IG lives. Whetstone's been doing those quite a bit, and so we've tuned into a few of those, and those are always a good time too. So you're in for a treat.
Yes. So just briefly, we wanted to talk about a couple of our upcoming events. Next week, we're featuring a couple of wonderful mezcal producers.
Yeah.
We've got Erstwhile Mezcal.
And then also Los Noales.
Also, yeah, Los Noales here. And
it's on May 7th, so 2 days after Cinco de Mayo. So, you know,
you're
when
still
you get
feeling
your,
festive.
that's right.
Your hangover's worn off.
And then the week after that, we have cider. We have summer sippin' cider. So we have Hemley cider and also Seattle Cider Company. And we have a jalapeno cider and a blood orange and a grapefruit.
Some really fun stuff.
Yeah, and so those are super fun as well. And then we have a whole calendar of events coming after that too. But really, if this is your first time joining us for one of these, welcome. The reason why we do these is to really support craft alcohol makers and help all of you get access to this delicious craft alcohol that maybe you might not be aware of and you might not know you can get online, especially during this crazy, stressful time that we're all kind of living through. Everyone's been really affected, and the craft alcohol community is no different. When you have a business that really relies pretty heavily on in-person communication and in-person foot traffic, it's a hard situation right now. And so we took our kind of popular Crafty Cask Meet the Maker events that we do in person normally and decided to
And my
transition
wine
them.
tours.
Yeah, and his wine tours.
Our love and passion of exploring and discovering, new
Yeah.
craft alcohol producers across many categories is something that we bonded over, and being able to share that with others has been a lot of fun, both in our personal lives and now doing these virtual tasting experiences.
Yeah. So we're excited you're here. We'll be throwing up the whole time kind of links where you can, if you haven't bought some of their wines already, how to get your hands on them and support them in that way, which we all really appreciate. You can also, if you are having a great time and you want to tip your hosts, we are at the Crafty Cask on Venmo. And so, yeah, with that, let's kick off with a little cheers. We need our glasses.
Hey, that's right.
Everyone, if you can hold it up to the camera, we love seeing what you're drinking. Yeah, cheers, everyone. Awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers. So I do want to take a quick look first in the chat. We have people from Portland, someone who works at Whetstone, home in Napa, Lubbock, Texas,
Kentucky.
Chicago now, Kentucky.
Club members of Carpenter and
Love it.
Hawkes. Yeah.
People loving Elaine's dog. Elaine just got a dog, so getting some cute puppy love over there. And Elaine and Brooks are joining from Vietnam, so we have an international audience this evening.
Yeah.
So yes,
Jersey Shore,
awesome.
Avalon, New Jersey. Well,
Cool.
thank you guys.
Yeah.
Texas.
We love having people from all over the country. So we're gonna jump into a little maybe Pinot Noir overview first. And then we are going to get started with Carpenter Wines. We're gonna start there. We were talking a little bit before about alcohol levels and kind of styles, and we feel like that's maybe the right starting point, and then we'll move into Whetstone. And so feel free to drink whatever you're drinking, and don't feel like you have to wait until we get to anything. We certainly will be as well. But that's kind of the order of operations, so and these do typically run 90 minutes, and we stick pretty close to that. And then we'll give, each featured maker will get, 15, 20 minutes or so to talk, answer questions, all that. But the more you engage, the more you ask questions, the more you'll get out of it. And then for Laura and Jamie, while you're talking, I will throw up some of those beautiful visuals that you sent along. Please don't feel the need to speak to the visuals like we're at a PowerPoint presentation or anything. It's really just to kind of help make it immersive and help make people feel like they are at your tasting rooms and in your vineyards and really having an immersive experience instead of just sitting on a computer. All right. So with that, you want to talk a little bit about Pinot?
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about Pinot, especially with these two great producers. One of my favorite varietals. It's probably the varietal that's stuck around for me the longest. I kind of feel like I go through phases and I'll get really into a certain region or a certain grape. And then over time that will kind of fade and I'll find something else that fills the void, if you will. But Pinot has stuck around for a long time. And I think the big reason for that for me is because there's so much diversity and there's so much variety to this grape. It's planted in so many different places. You find it, in its homeland of Burgundy. It's planted up and down the West Coast in the United States. You find it in Chile, in New Zealand, and the South Coast of Australia. Anywhere you can find kind of a cool, moderated temperature that's next to a large body of water, you can find the right kind of climactic and weather influences that allow for you to grow this grape that's pretty temperamental. And, we'll definitely get into that a little bit more when we start talking about the wine specifically. But arguably, Pinot Noir has the greatest ability to absorb where it's from and express it through the variety and the diversity of flavors and aromas that you get from it. It's funny because I feel like a lot of maybe, I don't want to say novice, but people that have kind of just started getting into wine find it to be thin, watery, And certainly compared to some red varietals, it doesn't have that oomph, that punch. But the beauty is in the nuance and the elegance and the kind of haunting aromas that, you know, there's cat lovers and dog lovers, and Cabernet Sauvignon, that's a dog lover. And Pinot Noir, I think, is kind of more like a cat lover. Like, you have to let it come to you. Cabs know exactly what they are, and you're going to figure it out without having to delve into it a whole lot. But it's a wonderful thing when that's what you're in the mood for. And then when you let you know, the Pinot come out of the glass, you kind of have to have a conversation with it. You know, it's not a companion wine that you can just go hunting through the woods with. You have to really kind of coax it out and give it some time to express itself. And I just think that's a beautiful thing about it.
Yeah. And for me, what I love about Pinot, so I just threw an article in the link. So Stefan is here, and he's a wine educator and kind of is good friends with Evan and knows a lot about wine as well. And so he wrote a beautiful article for us all about Pinot Noir. And so I just put that link in the article for you all to enjoy later if you'd like. But what I love about Pinot is that, honestly, I used to dislike it. So I was definitely one of those people who was really only exposed to a certain style of Pinot Noir, and they all just felt really light and almost like watery to me. And I didn't get it, and I didn't understand it. And so for a long time, I was one of those people who was kind of like, meh, I don't really love Pinot. And then I started discovering a lot of Pinots, mostly honestly from the Carneros region, and some Alexander Valley, I'd say as well, probably, that were just different. And they just tasted like a different wine to me. And and now Pinot is one of my all-time favorites, and I drink a lot of it. But it is a really fascinating grape and a fascinating varietal because it has such a wide range. It has such different personalities depending on the clone, depending on the climate. And so I'm really excited to get to explore 4 different Pinots tonight.
So yeah, I guess on that note, let's kick it over to Laura.
You're killing everyone with the dog and cat thing first, I have to say. You're making people feel like they have to choose, but I have to show you all something
Oh
real
yeah,
quick.
I like dogs and cats too.
Hold on, but we have to introduce.
Oh, this is actually really quite pertinent because, well.
So this is one of our cats, and her name is Pinot.
She's a black cat.
Her name is actually Pinot Noir, and she's our chubby cat. So she is not she's not a thin, watery Pinot at all. She is a big, bold Pinot. So yeah, so that's where we live with our Pinot cats. And I saw someone noticed earlier, Pinot cat. So yes. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No,
I had to introduce Pinot.
That's fine. I think that was quite poignant. I don't get an opportunity to introduce Pinot much these days. But yeah, let's send it over to Laura and let her talk a little about the Carpenter Wines. Laura, which of these, well, you can start whichever one you want to talk about first, but tell us a little bit about Carpenter and your vineyard sites and your kind of ethos and philosophy.
I'm focused on the animals for just a second. We also have a dog and a cat. So I'm a dog and a cat person, but I get what you're saying, Evan. Anyway, thank you for having us, first of all. Thanks everyone for showing up. It's nice to see some familiar faces and then some new people. Hi, everybody. So this is my husband, Jake Hawkes here, and we started Carpenter Wine back in 2012 to focus mainly on Pinot Noir, although we do make some other wines. And the wines that we're going to be tasting tonight are from a vineyard in the Petaluma Gap area of the Sonoma Coast. So it's a dual appellation. We label them as Sonoma Coast, but they are also Petaluma Gap.
Oh no, now I can see myself.
And speaking of, we have to give Jake a shout out. So we're kind of teasing with like Pinot versus Cab, but Jake is with Hawkes Wine, and so they make amazing cabs. And so we're going to be featuring some of his cabs in an upcoming virtual tasting as well. So we'll get to try the Pinot and Cab in the house, in the same household.
Yep. So the Petaluma Gap is a recent area in Sonoma, and it's nice to have that delineation, being that it was part of the Sonoma Coast, which was, I don't know, something like 500,000 square acres that didn't really give you any sense of where the grapes were actually grown. Tell us a little bit more about this vineyard site.
Justice Appellation 2 is that it reaches far inland, and where this vineyard is closer to the to the head of the San Pablo Bay than it is to the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know if I may. Well, when we started out, we didn't know if we were gonna do this professionally. I've always just made a bunch of wines besides Cabernet, and we've made a bunch of wines besides Cabernet. I grow and produce Cabernet as my day job for Hawkes. And we started fooling around making other stuff, and particularly making Pinot Noir a couple of years before we commercially released Carpenter. And I just fell in love with the area where this vineyard is. I mean, to just be really nebulous and romantic about it, I'll say that it just has a quality of light and quality of air that I think is an amazing combination of kind of, it's almost at the joint of Carneros and Sonoma Coast. I mean, I think of like Annapolis and the northern reaches of the Sonoma Coast as being true Sonoma Coast. And I think of this as a distinctly different, environment, a distinctly different climate, somewhere in between Carneros and Sonoma Coast, truly.
And it's very windy. That is what separates or distinguishes the Gap from its neighboring regions, is that wind that's constant, but it gets pretty wicked in the late afternoon. And I have seen a drone actually get just swept away over into the bay by the wind, because
Wow.
It gets pretty strong, and people talk about the influence that the wind has of toughening the grapes a little bit, giving the skins maybe a little bit more tannin and thickness. But it's also a cooling element, and what am I trying to say? It helps to just keep the grapes dry when it's foggy and that sort of thing, so that you don't have to use, a lot of any kind of.
So a really cool location, it sounds like, for growing Pinot, and then an added layer of complexity, an added layer of diversity that Pinot Noir also kind of exemplifies in the wine world is this concept of clones or biotypes within the species or the varietal of Pinot Noir. And so the two wines, if you guys have these wines at home, you've got the Swan clone and the Latache clone. Can you speak to us a little about those and kind of what that means?
Sure. Yeah. So yes, they're all Pinot Noir, and the difference is it's just a subtype of the Pinot grape. So they have different leaves. The leaves look different. They ripen at slightly different times. The clusters look different, and then they have slightly different flavors. All Pinot, but it's just a little bit more specific. Like if you're talking about heirloom tomatoes, they're all tomatoes, but they all have slightly different.
And Laura, why is this so common with Pinot Noir, but you don't see these like subtypes as much with other grape varietals? What's that about?
Well, Pinot, is a very fickle grape. It's the heartbreak grape, but it also is genetically unstable.
Not emotionally unstable. Genetically unstable.
Yeah, so it mutates frequently and spontaneously in the vineyard, depending on where it's grown or what it's growing near, and then over time. So and also because it's one of the most ancient grapes, if not the oldest wine grape in existence, it's had many centuries of being able to mutate. And so now there are hundreds of clones of Pinot. Yeah. In fact, at UC Davis nursery not that long ago, I was wondering, right now, how many different clones of Pinot you could buy. There are at least 130, 140 that you can.
Wow.
Yeah.
And by comparison, there's what, like 15 Cabernet clones?
I couldn't answer that. I was actually thinking about that as she was saying that. I don't know. I know I oughta, but I don't.
All good.
But less.
There are some. I mean, every grape has several, or 10 or 20 or 50 clones.
And they come and go too as they get cleaned up or don't, and get consolidated. But no, clones just aren't as big a deal in Cabernet as they are in Pinot Noir. I do think that people are starting to get, this is a bit of a digression. Farmers and winemakers are starting to get hip to Cabernet clones. But I think that, I mean, one of the reasons that I'm interested in making Pinot Noir, or interested in making anything else for that matter, is that there is just a cross-pollination of ideas. And I think, especially in California, one of the reasons that winemakers started to think about different clones in things like Cabernet actually is that they were common topics of conversation, and they mattered in Pinot Noir. And I think that caused people to think more closely about the idea of clonal variation in general.
Just to harken back briefly to the animals, an analogous way that I've often described clonal differences to people that have this question regarding what they are and why I should care is the difference between, you can see the difference pretty easily, like with dog breeds, between a boxer and a Labrador and a poodle. And so you could think of a boxer as being one varietal of dog, but there's variations within boxers. There's fawn boxers, and then there's brindle boxers, and they're still recognizably boxers, but there's little variations to them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring true as far as like genetically kind of what's going on in the varietals and the clonal differences?
I'm a scientist.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe so, but I'll also say that, I don't know, okay, we harvest, so these clones want to ripen at slightly different times, but I think that, you know, Jamie will be able to talk about this too. I'm drinking his wines, not ours, as I sit here. And it's like I think that that it wouldn't be fair to say that grapes ripen at a particular time. I think there's a spectrum of ripeness. And so we harvest all these grapes on the same night. And I think because they are different clones that want to ripen at different times or at slightly different physiological stages at a given date, that because we harvest them all on the same date, that it serves as a means of accentuating their natural differences anyway. Let's say we had a target Brix of like 23.5 or 24, harvested the Swan at 24 and the La Tâche at 24 and the Pommard at 24. I think you might actually not see as much variation as you do the way we do. But the ripenesses are always slightly out of whack. One is always slightly riper than the other. And I think that's the difference in the class.
Hey, Jamie, I want to give you a shout out and remind you can chime in if you want here, because we're talking kind of Pinot generally a little bit. And so if you have things you want to add into the conversation, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. And Max, I know Max from Max Napators is here too. And Stefan, who wrote that Pinot article, is here. So if any of the other wine geeks, which I mean very affectionately.
I like the term cork dork.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying hearing Laura and her man get through all this stuff. It's pretty interesting, and I'm fascinated and stoked. And you know, when you say La Tâche and Swan clone, it doesn't come off lightly with me. So I'm fired up and frankly enjoying your wines. So thanks for that. I'm going to mute myself back now.
All right, cool. Anyone else want to chime in with thoughts on Pinot generally before we have Laura kind of explain these wines to us a little bit?
Nothing, Jeremy. Nothing.
Cool.
Is Jeremy a talker? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Laura, do you want to, which one should, if people have both of them, like we are lucky enough to have, which one should we start with?
I typically start with the La Tâche clone. I find that it's the most sort of light on its feet and feminine, if you will. Yeah, it's to me kind of a good starting point. So La Tâche, if you're not familiar, is a vineyard in Burgundy, and we don't know if these clones actually came from the La Tâche vineyard, but this is what the farmer who grows the grapes calls this block of wine, this particular clone.
Well, yeah, and it's what's called a suitcase clone.
Yeah, or maybe a London fog, you know, sewed in the jacket, or who came over from France.
And I don't know if there's legal sanction for the law. So far nobody has complained. I mean, we don't make very much wine, so it's hard to know whether or not somebody at some point will say you can't keep that La Tâche.
I have too. But, oh well.
I don't know. But the idea is that somebody took cuttings from the fabled La Tâche vineyard, smuggled them into the United States, and then propagated vines with them. And that this guy ended up with some.
Yeah, so we get enough to make 65 cases of the La Tâche, so just under 2 barrels. When we pick, as Jake was saying, we pick all the clones at the same time, and then we keep them separate, and we decide which ones we like the best, and they go into these single clone bottlings. And then we also make a Sonoma Coast Pinot that includes all 3 of the clones that we get from Andrew. And yeah, I got to shout out, you showed a picture of Andrew Flocchini, who is the grower. Really lovely gentleman. He was born in the house on the property. I think there was a picture of that too. He's
in 1940.
1940, and he's never left. So he's been there. Wow. Yeah, pretty great guy. And we have been getting fruit from him since 2012, and we love it. We love the site. As Jake was saying, it's a really special place. And I don't know if the La Tâche, where it really comes from, but that's what we call it.
Cool.
Well, it's delicious.
Yeah, thank you. I thought 2016 was one of my favorite vintages that we've made wine from, and I love opening these and sharing them. So it's fun to.
Cheers. Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Let's do another cheers.
Let's friggin' delicious. That is so good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It almost has a little like slight savory quality to it that I really enjoy.
Oh, bless your heart.
Absolutely. Yeah. I find that is a quality that comes through in the wines from this vineyard.
Cool.
But I get it for sure in this vintage.
I don't know. I'm tempted to think that the salty, savory character has something to do with its proximity to the salty air there, and the salt in the air there, and the Petaluma River goes down and runs into the head of the San Pablo Bay, and the river is just below the bottom part of this vineyard, and that water there is brackish. So there's a feeling of salt in this place, all over there.
Are you talking about Ernie's Tin Barn?
No, I'm not talking about Ernie's Tin Barn, but no, I'm talking about anyway. There's salt all over there, and I've always gotten at these wines, and I love it. I think that the signature through line in Carpenter Wines is that kind of savory character and tannin and bright fruit. So like when I'm tasting Jamie's wines, which are delicious, I get a lot more darkness and a lot more voluptuous.
Mm-hmm.
I think our wines are just a little bit grittier and a little bit more red.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, and Jake, I have to say, bless your heart for saying bless your heart to me, because my sole purpose in life, living with a sommelier, is to get kudos from makers when I say something about the drink that like they're like, yeah, and I'm like, ha ha, sommelier, I got it.
Well, I mean, just because you want it in your wine, just because you're making the wine and you want it to be there doesn't mean it is.
True. Yeah, for sure.
So it's funny, as you were describing, more specifically where this vineyard was, I was like, oh yeah, that's where I turn off in case I don't want to get stuck in that corridor of hell on
Absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
And then you turn on right next to Ernie's
The
Tin.
highway.
Yeah, it's where the tiny horse farm is.
Okay, now I know exactly where it is. That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what do you all think of the La Tâche clone? Anyone want to help? Bomb. Thank you.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
I will add too that I'm always interested in taking there's no such thing as the best approach to winemaking, whatever it is. I'm really just interested in trying to make wines that have a point of view and make wines that are saying something that is not necessarily being said everywhere else. And because I think that the purpose of making these clonal selections would be diminished by a lot of massaging or even the presence of a lot of new oak. So everything that we do goes into neutral oak barrels, old oak barrels. And again, the idea is to just try to leave the native character of the different clones and Pinot Noir itself as naked as possible. And, sometimes that works better than others.
Yeah.
Well, it works great this time.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So then tell us a little bit about the Swan clone and how that's different.
Swan, yes. Well, the Swan has a little bit more clear-cut provenance. Joe Swan had a vineyard out in Forestville. He got it in the 70s, and it was a Zinfandel vineyard, and his buddy, Andrei Chelichev, who's kind of famous in the wine world, convinced him to put some cool climate varieties in there, so Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And we don't know where those cuttings came from, but they did really well. And so his neighbors started to borrow from him. And then over time, people knew it as the Swan Pinot. And then it was actually collected by a scientist or somebody from UC Davis who was going around getting clones from the United States and the best ones, and then taking them to the lab and heat treating them, and then making them available for people to buy as they're called heritage clones. So named for a person or a place in the United States. So this is one, the Swan clone. Mount Eden, there's Calera, I think Mary Edwards has a clone, a bunch of clones that you can find named for people and vineyards in the United States. So the Swan clone is just one that I just love. I'm loving this one right now. It's probably my favorite at the moment. It's a little bit wilder, like a little more exotic in its flavors and profile than the La Tâche. Still super light on its feet, lots of flavor, but I get more like exotic spice, like anise or star anise.
Yeah.
And definitely some.
Yeah, it's definitely a little richer.
When you said wildness, I mean, the first thought I had when I stuck my nose in it again today was it's got like almost like a brambly character,
It's got an alpine strawberry character to it that I love, and that little anise in there is just like, yeah, that's fantastic.
I think it has. I know that green is a word that you're not supposed to say, but I mean, it's not supposed to be pejorative in wine, but I actually always think the Swan has some green character to it. I always get like alpine strawberry or brambly. I mean, I think it is trying to articulate. I mean, I might say minty.
Yeah.
But like crushed green leaves character.
Little eucalyptus, maybe. Little,
yeah, I could see that.
That's a plus, not a detractor, by the way, guys. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely has a little more acid too, huh? The way it like does that little bit of pucker. Like I like that. Like that's yeah.
And so given that these are all harvested in the same time, the added acidity that you might get in the Swan is simply because maybe the Swan needs a little bit more time to ripen to the same level as the La Tâche.
Yeah, the Swan always tends to be the lowest bricks of the. We used to make 777 from this vineyard too, and we make a Sonoma Coast Pinot also that's not featured in this tasting. It's the thing we do at Carpenter, and it's usually a co-fermentation of all 3 or 4 clones that we get from the vineyard. Which means a co-fermentation is you put different lots of grapes together and let them ferment at the same time, as opposed to fermenting them separately and then blending them later. So typically the Sonoma Coast is a co-fermentation of the different clones, and I used to include the 777 in there from this vineyard, but boy, it really had problems getting right. And anyway, yeah, it tends to, typically speaking, the Swan is at least 1 brick slower than the La Tâche at the time of harvest.
Yeah, so it's right at 13% alcohol, whereas the La Tâche is 13.3. So not a big difference, but a little bit. And we made 70 cases of this one. So yeah, these are real small production. We like it that way. We have a lot of control over the whole process, and it feels good to be this size.
So I have to ask, because your labels are beautiful, and I know your maiden name is Carpenter, so I'm assuming but all of your labels have like Carpenter's tools on them as part of like the label. And so is there any story behind that, or is it just a fun play on your last name, or?
It's that, yes. It's a fun play.
It's because they look red.
You do, and I was,
Cool.
I was also going to follow that up by saying
Because hammers are cool.
Hammers
the
are
last bottling of the 777 have an axe on it.
Yeah, there really are
Yeah.
like endless hammerheads out there.
Yeah.
And to some extent too, I will say that the hammerheads are examples of American folk art and American industrial and beautiful American industrial design too. That I don't know. I've grown up around this stuff, using these things and thinking, damn. And to me, they're kind of like a graphically compelling abstractions. If you look at them by themselves, you can't even really tell what the hell they are.
Right.
And
Yeah,
you
without
could
the
have,
association of Carpenter, you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
and you could have gone with a shark as well, hammerheads.
I've been pitching that.
No sharks.
I've been pitching that idea for a couple years now. I don't think it's gonna fly. So.
Yeah, my in-laws are chiming in from, or they're watching from Florida, and I'm sure they have something to say about the hammerhead. But anyway.
I love it.
Laura, I love your swan. I had it at Terrapin Creek. That's how I found your wines.
Oh,
I think
wow,
it's-
yes, that's right.
And I think it's lovely with food, especially fish dishes and vegetables. It's very lovely.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I remember you ordering from me. And
Thanks for chiming in, Lori.
Yeah.
That's how I found both Whetstone and Carpenter was from restaurants. So it's a
that's
great way
great.
to find your wines.
That's great.
Poor sons of bitches.
I know.
I know there's a few other of you out there who have both of these. I would love it if you would chime in and let us know. I don't know if you've done a little side by side smelling both of them next to each other, and like they're pretty distinct and pretty different, which is fun.
Mhm.
But if any of you have both of them and have thoughts or questions, I'd love to hear you chime in. And if not, Michelle, I know you had a great question.
I know, but I was waiting. I know. Well, it wasn't related to, unfortunately, I only opened one because I don't have a fancy Corvin and was not going to drink 2 bottles tonight.
Well, we'll throw our link to the Amazon shop right in here, and you can get a Corvin.
I know, I want one, so do.
Boo! You should be drinking 2 bottles tonight.
I know. Come on. Where's your ambition?
So I definitely fall into the camp of I like Pinots, I don't love them, and I generally steer from them because of the point that Evan made earlier, where there's such high well, you didn't use the variability word, I use variability. You said there's a wide breadth of them, but I don't like that. I don't want to buy a Pinot and end up being light and thin. So what can I do with just looking at a bottle and having never had it before and know that I'm getting a bigger, bolder one and not a lighter, thinner one?
Well, I will say that I think that this is the part that the merchant is supposed to play in this whole thing. And I think that that's why you form a relationship with somebody who you can buy wine from and who knows your particular palate and your particular tastes. And, you know, you want somebody who will listen to what you're interested in and actually like, rather than pretending to listen to you and then sell you something that they like.
Mhm.
I also do think getting to know regions helps with Pinot in particular. It's not a fail safe, right? There are definitely big, bold, ones that come out of Washington State, and for sure, and it can be a little stereotypy, but like I know Pinots from Carneros for the most part are bigger, bolder, and I my odds are better of liking it. And so I think that helps me at least, is knowing like where it's from and kind of what the climate's like and things like that.
There's a lot of variability.
Now, and I would also kind of add to that a little, Michelle, in that now this isn't going to be a way to determine if it's going to be a bigger, more full-bodied kind of fleshier Pinot Noir. But frankly, simply because of how difficult Pinot Noir is to grow, the term heartbreak grape was used earlier. And also added to this, the surge in popularity in Pinot Noir in the last 15 years or so. There's a lot of producers out there that are making Pinot Noir simply because it's popular, and had vineyards that maybe were planted to Merlot 15 years ago, and as it became popular, planted Pinot because people wanted Pinot. And because it's so fickle, if you're planting in a place that was good for Merlot, it probably isn't great for Pinot. And frankly, price point is something that you need to be aware of if you're going to roll the dice. And unfortunately, rolling the dice with a Pinot that's cheap is probably not going to come up aces, because it's
harder to grow,
it's
right?
laborious.
It's a skill, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
not an easy thing to cultivate, and it's something that's often overworked and overmade in the winery. And both of those will lead you with a disappointing result, although they might be able to sell it for $15 a bottle.
Right. Yeah, it is a funny thing because going from being someone who used to not really like Pinot and now being someone who like is regularly like, oh, $60 bottle of Pinot, that's my favorite Pinot. Like, it's hard because it's kind of annoying because I used to think it was kind of a wine, and now I like most of the Pinots I like do tend to be up there in the price point, and that kind of sucks, but it is.
But it's so worth it.
Yeah.
I can tell you, this is probably one of the best Pinots I've ever had. So
Cool.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Thanks. Well,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure. Wait,
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
hi, Jake and Laura.
Hi.
Dennis,
Hi, Dennis.
Morgan. Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah.
Sorry. My question is relative to controlling the body of the wine, because I drink both Hawks, which I absolutely love, cabs, and I drink Pinots, which I don't love as much. And a lot of it is relative to somewhat to the body of the wine and the mouthfeel. So my question is, can you touch on that? Is that controllable? Or do you even think about it, trying to control that part of it? Because that's a big, part of the flavor profile. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I'm hunting that one. That's great question.
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think of that as mouthfeel, or what I think of as texture. I think that's a really big deal in winemaking, and I think in Cabernet, it's my feeling that like 10 years ago and even up till today, starting 20 years ago, peaking 10 years ago and persisting into today, I feel like people were winemakers were probably preoccupied with texture more than any other single component in Cabernet. And I think that, so yeah, it's something that you think about as a winemaker. I feel like, to be frank, there's too much preoccupation with texture and too much preoccupation with color at the expense of aromatics. And I'm not saying the texture doesn't matter, but I will say that for Pinot Noir, what drew me to Pinot Noir in the first place, and what I think the golden ring in Pinot Noir is fabulous, expressive aromatics and aromatics that are unmistakably Pinot Noir. So for me, that's the first stop. And I will say too that I am always trying to tread a line in the wine that I make between something that people will, something that confronts and challenges people, but not so much that they will reject it entirely. So, I mean, I like our Cabernets to be a little bit harder. I like them to be a little bit more acidic than typical Cabernet. I think that our Pinot Noirs tend to be a little bit more brusque than typical Pinot Noir, a little bit more bracing, a little bit more acidic, a little bit more tannic.
Except that, yeah, these wines to me, they're really in a sweet spot because
they're older.
Yeah, they're 16, so they've had a chance to really mellow out and has softened the tannins to just a lovely silky suppleness. And but yes, they do have a little bit more tannin, maybe than some in their youth.
Do you guys use whole cluster? I'm sorry if I missed that.
What's that?
Do you guys use whole cluster fermentation, or I'm sorry if I missed that.
No, you
We
didn't.
do some whole cluster fermentation, but not that much.
Like a quarter, maybe?
Sometimes I gotta say, I mean, when we started out, we did a lot of experiments with different things, and I know that people talk about whole cluster fermentation and Pinot Noir a lot. I have not been really impressed by the results that it's yielded for us, and I gotta say, I think it probably has something to do with the ripeness of the fruit when we're picking it. I mean, you know, the stems are not real. The stems are pretty green when we're harvesting, and so I found that I get things are kind of abrasive, and I get a bitter component and a little bit of greenness. We carbonic Pinot, that's all whole cluster, and yes, it's good, but it's not like, if I had to make one Pinot Noir, it wouldn't be that one.
Understood. Great answer. Great answer.
It's partial whole cluster.
Jamie, I would love to kick it over to you to start talking about your wines a little bit. Now that we've had some time to talk about Pinot generally and, you know, learn all about Carpenter's wine. So, but first, can everyone raise a glass to Carpenter and thanks to Laura and Jake for showing us a good time?
I'm getting the Whetstone Wines in.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
I'm on the Whetstone.
I know. More fun to, yes.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you,
Very
guys.
cool.
That was great.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah. And so, Jamie, talk to us a little bit. We're going to have to swap our glasses here.
The first thing I want to ask is Evan, how's your foot?
Evan managed to break his foot while on shelter in place.
I'm mobile, but definitely hobbled. And I notice if I'm on it for more than, you know, half an hour that it kind of starts to swell and doesn't feel great. But yeah.
The better question is, Suzanne, how is it going taking care of Evan?
Yeah.
I'm so easy to take care of, I'm sure, is her answer.
Luckily, we have a small place.
Yeah.
I just saw my friend who shot himself in the foot with a nail gun today.
Oh, geez.
God,
He
Jake,
broke his foot dancing. He was dancing in our living room, literally, and that's how he broke his foot.
Yeah.
Got it. All right.
Thank you for your concern, Jamie.
Yeah, I am. You're one of the people who bring a lot of people to our doorstep here in Napa. So I want to monitor your progress, and I want to make sure that Suzanne is taking care of you, because if not, I've got to back up. So you just let me know.
All right.
One of the things I wanted to talk about really quickly, you mentioned the whole dog versus the cat thing, and we have a 115-pound lab, which is clearly not missing any meals. Ace Whetstone, who we love, but I also would say that, you know, the whole cab versus Pinot thing, you know, we're firmly in that sort of Nebbiolo, which is, you know, the Pinot of Italy camp, along with, you know, with Pinot Noir from Burgundy and more to the point from here. But I was a little taken aback by that, just in terms of like the way that I see the wonderful tasting that we've got going tonight versus Carpenter and Whetstone. The last time I had La Tâche was a 69 DRC, and I had it in Jacques Sess's cellar. So it's been a while. This was back in.
You look familiar.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, it was just like, I love that you brought that up, the whole dog versus the cat thing, because frankly, you know, Pinot Noir can be super feminine, it can be super sexy, it can have a ton of finesse, it can be very floral, but it can also have some power. You know, it's funny because I look at sunshine in California in a very different way than a lot of folks do, and it's, you know, it can be a real pain in the ass, and it can get away from you. And you know, I listened to Jake and Laura talk very deftly about, you know, Pinot being the heartbreak grape, and you know, it is exactly that. And you know, Pinot Noir is here today and gone this afternoon, and with that sunshine comes a bit of gravity. But I also think, you know, in my experience from working in Burgundy, is that the French would, at least most of the folks I hung out with, they would give up their first and maybe their second born for a couple extra weeks of that California sunshine. So I think it's pretty hilarious. But I also think, you know, to each his own. And I've seen some comments from people today, or at least on the show in the last, you know, 45 minutes, asking about, you know, how do you figure out what it is that you enjoy, and how do you see that? I mean, what's the price break? I mean, is it like a super expensive bottle? Is it a cheap bottle? What have you? But I would say that, the way that Michelle and I look at it is very simply, it depends on our mood. It depends on the night or the day or the lunch or maybe the late breakfast. But it also depends on what we're cooking, what we're listening to musically, what kind of vinyl we're spinning, on the, on our player. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. And I actually love tasting the difference between the Carpenter Latache and the Carpenter Swan. And then you're making quite a jump to the Whetstone wines. But again, they're the same varietal. They're all four wines are Pinot Noir, but they're grown in very different regions in very different ways. But there is a beauty to that in California, which I think makes it very special. And as a consumer, man, the world is your oyster right now. You start in 2008 when everything really went south, and then now it's even more interesting. But the cool thing is that you as a consumer have an awesome opportunity to try a myriad of Pinot Noirs that you maybe would not have gotten a chance to. And frankly, it's funny because when I think of the Gap, the Petaluma Gap, brilliant area. You guys are so lucky to get fruit from there. And then I shift over to Russian River, and then maybe 30,000 foot view, and you look at Sonoma Coast in general. Man, there are thousands of microclimates within both of those regions. And then if you distill it down into the Petaluma Gap area, having the luxury of processed fruit and made fruit from the Gap's Crown Vineyard over the years, it's just it's special. It really is special. So I'm fired up to make the wines that I do. I'm stoked to be introduced to the Carpenter wines. It's a real treat. But I also want everybody to know that, Pinot Noir is so versatile coming out of the state. And yes, I do have 5-day hair. That's why I have a hat on right now.
I got Suzanne to cut my hair last weekend. It's the only reason I don't have a hat on at this point.
That's trust, man, right there.
Suzanne, if you can come over.
Cut your hair from the 6-foot distance.
That's right. I love it.
Jamie, I love your wines. I went to Angel Restaurant in February and had a lovely glass of one of your wines there, and went to your winery the next day and bought a case because it's so good. And I love the whole story, and I love Ace and the winery. It's so beautiful.
Their property is beautiful. You're right. Yeah.
It's a different type of wine than Laura's wines, but I love hers too. And I only didn't go to her winery because of the COVID-19 shutdown. But you both do lovely wines, but it just showcases the differences, I think, in Pinots.
Yeah, amen. Potato.
So
where's the Wallala Vineyard? Because that's what I'm drinking. It's delicious.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. The Wallala Vineyard is in Annapolis, and it's only 81 miles as a crow flies from where I'm sitting right now here in Napa, but it usually takes me about 2.5 hours to get up there. The vineyard is, it's that very alluvial / Gold Ridge land vineyard. I mean, I can climb up on one of the water towers and I can see the Pacific, on a semi-clear day, from the vineyard. But from a counterintuitive standpoint, and again, the Sonoma Coast is 60 miles long by 30 miles wide. The fact that it spills into Glen Ellen is almost hilarious for me. But that particular vineyard gets really warm. And so it's really interesting. It's a place where you can set, 3 to 3.5 tons to an acre up there very comfortably and come out with something that's ripe phenolically, and that I'm super stoked on. I mean, the alcohols for me are kind of ambiguous in terms of what I feel as, when the vineyard is ready to give up the ghost. You clearly farm for a living, Jake, and so do I. And I spent a lot of years working for Larry Turley, not worrying about alcohols, but worrying about how to change a clutch on a tractor and, desperately learning to speak Spanish in night school. So it was a little different for me. But that vineyard up there is pretty special. It's 828 and 113. It breaks down to like 60% 828 and about 40% of the 113. But it's interesting up there. I like it, and I think that that alluvial fan that's up there that clearly migrated downhill at a point in our last couple of millennia, or billions of years, if you will. It gives the wine a lighter color, and a little more akin to some of the things that you were doing, even with what I put it through in the cellar in terms of cold soak and indigenous primary and secondary. And like you, I kind of eschew using whole cluster because I just don't believe in it in California. Never have.
So it's got,
Can I interject a question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Dennis.
Whole cluster fermentation. So, actually just whole cluster. What's the difference?
When you go to the store, and you probably know this, I'm just going to give it super layman's terms, but when you go to the store and you buy grapes, you come home and you eat the grapes and you discard the stems. And so with whole cluster fermentation, the opposite, you put the whole shoot match into the bin and the fermentation vat. And there's a lot of liability that comes with that. And I learned that the hard way as we dump some alcohol, down the drain. I look at it in a very positive light in terms of the Syrah that I make. And again, not to stray the focus on or the spotlight off of Pinot Noir, but there's more to it in terms of the bacon fat, the pepperiness, some of the wonderful characteristics that you can add to a wine, but then also the other side of it can be asparagus and bell pepper and, in such degrees that you really don't want it in that. And I think with Pinot Noir, what I saw working for, again, a very short time in Burgundy was that, most of the vines, most of the houses that I happened to live with the Cess family at Dujac, but I mean, they did stuff because it was, 60 to 100-year-old vineyards. I mean, they weren't dicking around thinking like, oh man, I think that would be really cool. I mean, they were doing it based off of a history of farming that really went back far. And so I think with California, I think our vineyards, especially with Pinot Noir, have to become older. The oldest vineyards, I know Laura was talking earlier about Joe Swan. I also looked at David Hirsch, where I made wines from for quite a while. Some of the stuff that Ted Lemon's working with, Fred Scherer. But it's there just really aren't old vineyards that are Pinot Noir, based in the state. And so I think with the whole cluster, you got to be super careful. I'd much rather you have a little more fruit in the wine, a little more nuance than asparagus and bell pepper.
Okay, thank you.
So for those of you, because I was just asked and verified this with Evan myself, but we've been hearing Burgundy come up a bit. And Burgundy is pretty much exclusively Pinot and Chard, right? Like those are the grape varietals they grow there. So while in Europe, they call them by the region that they're grown in and the technical terms. I'm going to say the AOC.
In France it would be, yes, and AOC.
Yeah, the AOC. But here we call them by the grape varietal. So if you're a fan of Burgundy, then you're likely a fan of Pinot Noir. It might just be a different style that the Pinot Noir is made in. Yeah. And I find that to be particularly true for me with Chablis. So for a very long time, similarly, I was always like, I don't like Chardonnay. It's too buttery. It's too oaky. It's not my jam. I love Chablis. And then it was like, wait a minute, Chablis is Chardonnay. It's just the way that they make it in France. And so it's just an interesting thing to keep an eye on. When you love certain European wines and wines from other countries, like figuring out what that grape varietal is and tracing it back, because that really helps you then start to identify, it's not about the grape actually, it's about the winemaker, and it's about the process, and it's about how they're bringing that grape to life and how much they're manipulating it or how much they're not manipulating it.
And or it so doesn't have to be about just the grape.
It doesn't have to be just about
There's
the grape.
More than just the grape. Yeah. People that get in the tour car in the morning and tell me that they don't like Chardonnay, I always
challenge accepted.
I sit them down and I say, you haven't found a Chardonnay that you like yet.
That's right. You haven't kissed enough frogs.
Yes.
That's right.
What you're saying, Evan, is that you actually shouldn't worry about Chardonnay, that you would love the Whetstone Viognier. That's what you meant to say there, right?
Oh, you make dude.
Speaking of pairing wine with food, and then you mentioned pairing wine with music. I've also taken it to an extent where I pair wine with what I'm watching on Netflix. And, you know, something like a suspenseful thriller, the Viognier doesn't work. You need the Syrah for that.
Right.
But, you know, with like a kind of cheeky rom-com,
Don't look at me.
the Viognier is, you know, it's floral and it's fun and it's, you know, it's a little bit of a hussy.
All right, I'll take it.
It's
That's fine.
What is a rom-com, Evan?
a romantic comedy.
Did you just
They're very popular among the females.
Right.
Not true. Hey, Jamie, I would love for you to, for those of people on the call who aren't familiar with Whetstone, just to give us a little bit of backstory about how long you guys have been around, what your story is, and I'll throw up some of those pictures that I have as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I started Whetstone in 2002 while I was still working for Larry Turley. And for about 3 years, I made the wines there. We've grown over the years, and in 2010, my wife, Michelle, convinced me, and I guess the both of us, to sign up for an old 19th century chateau here in Napa, which you see there in that picture. And what we decided to do is just figure out how to sell wine at a profit. You know, we bit off a lot here in Napa, but we were also pretty convinced that we had something special to offer. She and I both have a hospitality background. Between the two of us, we've got about 40 years in the restaurant industry. And so anyway, long story short is that, you know, Whetstone, we welcome you into our home. You're seeing some pictures of the main tasting salon, which we welcome folks into with a big roaring fire in the fireplace for the winter months. But about mid-May, a couple weeks from now, you know, the energy shifts outside. You see Addie, our wonderful administrator of hospitality. She's been with us for all these, she's been with us for over 10 years now. An amazing soul and does a lot for us. But at Whetstone, and there's Ace, there's the guy, our ambassador of love. But you know, Whetstone, we're small production. We make about 3,000 cases, which is what we sell through here. We have switched out of all wholesale, so we're exclusive to the chateau and winery here at 1075 Atlas Peak Road. And you know, we got a wonderful wine club. We do a lot of DTC stuff, but it took us a very long time to figure out how to get out of wholesale and make that jump. And you know, and thank the good Lord above that we were able to make that jump. So we've been out of wholesale for almost a year now. And you know, while we didn't see any of this stuff coming, we feel really good about it. We've had so much support from our wine club members, the community across the street, the online support, but it's been super fun. And we make I make a handful of Pinot Noirs. I make a Viognier and a Syrah. Pretty simple.
Rosé.
Pretty simple. Sorry, and a Rosé. New for us, all 50 cases. I love seeing the Carpenter Wines. I love the exclusivity of that 60 and 70 case, you know, deal. I thought we were small, but that's it. And then we even went lower with the 50 cases of Rosé from Lodi.
Yeah, and I will say the property at Whetstone is, I haven't had the pleasure of being up to Carpenter yet, so I'm looking forward to that.
Also gorgeous.
Yeah.
In Chalk Hill, looking down over the vineyards. It's so pretty.
Yeah, but Whetstone does really feel like you're being welcomed into someone's home, and it's this old stone kind of French chateau feeling thing, and it feels like a little slice of kind of European wine world in Napa.
Yeah.
And the outdoor area during the summer months is wonderful, and it's just it's a place you want to hang out. It's
Definitely.
You know, there's those handful of wineries in wine country where, you know, when you start your day, you're like, I want to go to 3 wineries, and then you get to the first one and you're like,
I'll stay here.
maybe I'll just stay here. And Whetstone definitely has that feeling to it.
For sure.
Especially with cute Ace running around and and you know,
And the
snuggling you.
lovely hospitality staff
for
there.
sure.
I know.
And
They're all on here.
Yeah,
and there's a new groundskeeper, a new head groundskeeper, Evan and Suzanne.
Oh.
If you have witnessed that, but yours truly has taken over. And my wife being, you know, who she is, there's no raise. There's a lot more added to my honeydew list. It's a little more brutal the way she treats me, but I get it done. It's grass cutting, pruning olives, blowing the estates. 3.2 acres, by the way. It's not like when I was 16 cutting 100 square feet of grass before I went out on a Saturday night.
Expanded job scope. It's like,
Jamie, my first exposure to your wines actually kind of coincided with a kind of funny connection. So a restaurant that I worked at in Arizona, Bloom was the name of it, used to carry your John boat.
Yeah.
And we also used to carry Domaine Dujac. And one of the first like really nice bottles of wine that I purchased was a bottle from the restaurant. Yeah. And it's also the first bottle of wine that ever had stolen from me.
Oh my God.
Oh, I remember that story.
It was a Grand Cru Saint Denis. And I think maybe just because the label is like so simplistic, somebody was like, "Oh, Evan won't miss this. It's probably a nothing wine."
Have you looked to your left? Have you looked to your left at the beautiful woman to your left for culpability?
Right.
It wasn't my fault.
It was years ago. It was a 2005 vintage. I remember it distinctly because I was like, "I'm gonna find whoever."
Yeah, that's Fox Restaurant Group.
Yep, it sure is.
Yeah, they're fantastic. My close friend Regan Jasper was a partner in that group until they sold. But they were awfully big to Whetstone across that whole state, and then as they grew, we ended up in 20 states with them with the John boat. So their Balloon, their North restaurants, their Zen Burgers.
True Food Kitchen, as imagine that was
True
one.
Food Kitchen crushed it fresh, man. They were so good. Such good people.
So, hey, Jamie, I'd love for you to just do a little compare contrast between the two wines for us real quick.
Okay. So you've got the 2018 Pleasant Hill, the 2017 Wallala. 18 was the biggest crop in the history of the state, at least as far back as recorded history is concerned. And as a winemaker, as a grower, you begin to be concerned on a couple of levels. I mean, frankly, let me step back. As a grower, you're stoked. I mean, you're going to get paid. But as a winemaker, there's some worry about, whether or not it comes out with any concentration, whether or not you retain any acidity. With me, what I learned in terms of vineyard focus was kind of maniacal. And I got raked over the coals for it with my previous employers until I got it, and I got it real quick. So we spend a lot of time right after bud break, and you get some shoot growth, and you start thinning out. Once we get into flowering and set, again, we're going back in for a second pass, maybe at that point, maybe a third, and we're dropping any weak shoot fruit. We're just, getting any triples out of the way, so that by the time we get to veraison, we're pretty set in terms of the vineyards that I work with and the folks that work with us and that actually manage the vineyards. But 18 was a bit of a pain in the butt, and just in terms of trying to figure out what yields were going to be and how the wines are going to end up. I have to say, I was pretty tickled at what we got in the barn. 17. And I'll talk about each of the different wines, but really quickly, 17 was sort of the opposite. It was just super, super rainy winter, which we desperately needed after 3 years of drought. And 16 was pretty good, but 17 was a deluge of water. We had a very late spring, at least in the majority of the vineyards that I was working with, and then really just some unbelievably hot weeks in the middle of the summer. So it kind of forces your hand, but we ended up, sort of below average yields there in 17. So diametrically opposed in terms of the vintages. Pleasant Hill is one of the most pleasing wines that I make. It's super easy. It's an incredible vineyard that was planted. Man, I'm going to miss this, but let's see, it's 2020 now. So basically right around 1998, 99. And so, again, it's starting to get a little age on it, nothing spectacular, but they're Gold Ridge loam soils there. It's 667 and 115 clones, which, microbially speaking at this point probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but, at least not to me. But Gold Ridge loam is kind of like if you ever had a piece of pound cake, and they're from my in-laws in Florida, they know exactly what pound cake is. But in terms of what the vines have to fight for, there's just not a whole lot to worry about because they can pierce right down through that soil series and kind of find water, if you will. But the wine itself, reads kind of like a typically sort of bigger, broader shouldered Russian River Pinot does. And I get, you get a little bit of a darker fruit in that. And then you do the Wallala, which you'll see immediately if you've got the two in your glass. But you get, really fruit forward, a lot of Bing cherry, which, that whole Gravenstein Highway is kind of known for, that whole area that this vineyard actually sits in. You get some pretty elevated, fruit structure. You get some wonderful tannin that kind of sneaks in the back door, and you got a little bit of acidity there, but not a ton. It's about 35% new French oak, and that's about all I can stomach putting in, to be quite frank, on a couple of levels.
I will say I don't know what it is about that wine, the Pleasant Hill, but as soon as I took a sip, I was like, man, that makes me want meat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, which is funny because I don't associate that with Pinot. That's more like a cab kind of mentality, but it does really it makes me want like some meat with it. And I think it would be amazing.
Listen, you can get into some lamb with a little rosemary.
Yeah, totally.
You can, there's nothing you could do with the pig that is probably not apropos to this, as long as you kind of sweeten it up. And frankly, I worship the pig on most days. Duck, yeah, this has got it. It's definitely has it.
Speaking of the versatility of it,
yeah.
Something that always has struck me with the Pleasant Hill vintage in and vintage out is that it's not uncommon for me to get like a hint of cola spice in Pinot Noirs, but this one is always distinctively sarsaparilla. And I don't know, I just think that's
sassafras tea, sarsaparilla cola, and cola in the Russian River Valley, again, whatever that means, it's a big component, and a lot of people would call it, dark cherry cola.
Yeah.
For me, it just kind of comes and goes, but the Pleasant Hill is earmarked with that, Evan, and thanks for mentioning that. It is definitely a hallmark of it. And I've been working with Pleasant Hill since 2002, so it was fourth leaf. So it's been with me since I started Whetstone.
Wow.
We can. Does anybody have any questions about Pleasant Hill too? I'm sorry, I'm kind of talking over everybody here.
I would love, actually, if we could cover the Wallala, and then we can open it up to questions for the rest of the session.
Okay,
I think that would be great.
Sure.
Yeah.
The Wallala Vineyard, again, like I said, more of an alluvial fan with some Gold Ridge loam, Hilltop Vineyard. This thing gets a lot of sun. It's sort of carved out of, if you can imagine, I shot a wild boar up there. There's all sorts of guinea hen. There's a black bear. There's also lots of crystal meth and some insane, pot being grown up there too. So you have to be careful what you ask for. Luckily, I grew up with a shotgun and still live with one, in my closet. But so it wasn't too unsettling for me. But the vineyard itself is wild, but it's wonderfully farmed by some friends of mine. Atlas Vineyard Management, they crush it up there. It's owned by Bill Price. But at the end of the day, you can see the color difference. It looks so different in terms of the color profile than the Pleasant Hill. And for Pinot Noir, it's a much lighter shade. And you're Burgundy, and you're from north to south. You're from Dijon to Beaune. You get into things from Gevrey-Chambertin all the way down to Louis Saint George, and further. There's a wonderful difference in that. And so for me, I celebrate that. I think the interesting thing about the Wallala Vineyard and that color is that it kind of throws you off because it's got a fair amount of finesse. It's got a fair amount of stoke and energy behind it that the Pleasant Hill doesn't have. So go figure. But again, this is all destemmed fruit. Both wines are. Both are cold soaked. Both are. Both are allowed to rip to about 88 or 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're afraid to go any further than that, especially using indigenous primary and secondary yeasts. And they're also both left on their lees for 14 months before I rack them a month prior to bottling, and that's it. It's pretty simple winemaking.
I have to say, the first thing I leaned over to Evan when I first smelled this, and I was like, oh my God, this smells like cotton candy. And I don't know, it just immediately hit me like this smells like cotton
That is
candy.
awesome. It was great.
And it was like one of those, I love when that happens. Like every once in a while there's a wine and it's just like so viscerally like this memory And for whatever reason, this really like brings cotton candy like out of Carnival to me, and it's so delightful. It's really.
I love it. We should take a couple of bottles to the Napa County Fair.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Watermelon blow pop heaven hiding in there. All right.
Hey, man, I know Addie right now is freaking out because she is the queen of descriptors and coming up with stuff.
I love it.
Yeah, what was the one that was on the tasting descriptions a while ago that Addie had to take responsibility for? Oh, she's shushing me now.
Oh, man, you know, on the Viognier front, she nailed it. I grew up with eating a boatload of candy as a kid, but banana runts.
Banana runts were
all
great.
right.
It just crushed me. It was like,
Yep.
That is exactly what that is. Thank you.
Yep, totally. Hey, I want to open it up to questions, but first, can we cheers Jamie and Whetstone for, you know, all this great knowledge and great stories and fun stuff. Yeah, great. I love that. I love seeing everyone's glasses up at the
Thank you, guys.
camera. Yeah, thank you. I know we did have a question that came in earlier that we haven't gotten to yet. And then I would love if anyone else has questions, throw them in the chat, start to unmute yourself. Let's just kind of keep this casual. But there was a question about food pairing with Pinot. And speaking of, I have cheese back here that I almost forgot about. So I'm gonna bring my cheese out now because I forgot about it. But yeah, so so Laura, Jamie, do you guys have thoughts on how to figure out, and maybe not even just with Pinot, but just how to think about food pairing with wine and how you guys kind of think about that and approach it?
I'll say something really quick, and I've been talking
Sure.
a lot, so I'd love to hear Laura and Jake talk about it. But it really does come down to like what you like and what you enjoy. And I've, you know, Michelle and I both have spent a lifetime in food and wine, and so we get it and we understand it maybe a little better than most. But I always tell people, man, it's like whatever you're stoked on. And if it's a tequila cocktail, if it's a glass of beer, if it's you know, Pinot Noir or whatever, and you can pay $8-9 for a great bottle of wine, or you could pay $800 or $900 ridiculously for a very silly purchase. But I think whether you're into salmon or, you know, if you have the luxury like we do of walking out into the backyard and pulling some vegetables out, or, you know, you put a steak on the grill, I mean, whatever it is that you're into, I really don't think that at the end of the day, especially considering what we're all going through, that there's a wrong answer. So I'd say just, you know, go for it, have fun, experiment. And sometimes it's going to suck, but sometimes it's going to be really wonderful and you're just going to nail it.
Yeah, for sure.
Nail it. Yep. Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that and say, do I need to unmute?
No,
No,
you're good.
You got it.
Just, yeah, I tell people, you know, drink what you like and eat what you like. And you can do the complementary flavors or the contrasting, you know, and you can play with texture, you play with flavor and sauces and preparations. But again, at the end of the day, it's really about just enjoyment and having something in your glass and on your table that you love and sharing with people, hopefully that you love also. But with Pinot, I mean, it's pretty versatile because there is a wide range of styles and expressions, and it can be salmon, it can be vegetable based, it can be charcuterie, definitely duck. I love duck and Pinot. Like we made some Rillette, which is brilliant with a bigger Pinot. I think these Pinots would be really good with some duck Rillette.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, just it's fun to play with it. I think that's kind of what I like to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Hey, Laura, we just re-smelled the Swan clone, and I was immediately like, oh, this nose has changed so much. And it's like really, it's so amazing when it's opened up a little bit more, how
And they poured
it
these about
transforms.
2 hours ago. So
Yeah,
they'd already
right?
opened it, and now they've opened up yet another layer.
Oh,
yeah, it's so
very
fun.
cool.
Yeah, I love how wine transforms the longer it sits in your glass. And,
Yeah, that
you know,
anise component, and also because it has been sitting there not being swirled for a while.
Mhm.
Here's a quick anecdote, if I may.
Mhm.
But you know, I'm guilty of brother kegging wine and just like, okay, let me get through this. Like, what's next? And this Swan clone from Carpenter is just like classic example of just relax, just wait.
let it sit, let it breathe.
Amazing. And I'll tell you something really funny, really quick. But when I was when I landed in Maury, Saint Denis, one of the first nights we were having dinner at the Cess family, they pulled out an older Rimier Chambol and just a Village wine. But we sat down at the table, and in my American California brain, I thought, this is insane. If this is the first wine that we're having tonight, what the fuck are we going to be after this? Right. And so clearly I finished my glass. Well, nobody offered to pour me extra. Nobody said, hey, there's not only not an extra wine, but that was it. That was your glass for dinner. And so I just look at that as, for me, I think I went through DTs for the first 2 weeks I was there. But point is, wine can really be enjoyed and savored, and you can relax into it. And I love this Carpenter Pinot for that, man. That's
Thank you.
delicious.
Thank you.
And I've had it open for 2 hours now. So yeah, it's good. What's it going to look like?
Yeah, it is a really fun thing to do. And sometimes, honestly, sometimes we'll open 2 different bottles of wine and like have a little bit of this one, have a little bit of that one, let them sit, swap, because it is like they do really transform right before your eyes. And it's such a fun kind of science experiment. Yeah. You have to be careful sometimes because if they're aged, you can miss their peak and then they can kind of start to fall off. But also I want to say with food pairing, I do think it's, I think you guys are totally right. You can eat with whatever you want with whatever you like to drink, because you can eat them and drink them separately. You can eat the food and swallow it and drink the wine and swallow it. And that's totally acceptable. When it comes to food pairings and when you hear about people saying that's an amazing food pairing, the way you kind of test that is keep a little bit of the food in your mouth and take a sip of wine. And if they get better and like magic happens in your mouth, that's a great food pairing, right? To you. And it might not be to the person next to you, but to you. Whereas like a lot of people, I think food pairing is just eating and drinking together. And that's what most of us do all the time. And it's awesome. But like, if you're trying to like hone that scale of becoming like finding those good food pairings, make sure you're keeping a little food in your mouth when you're taking a sip and seeing, does it make one better? Does it make the other better? Does it make both better? When it makes both better, that's when like you've hit the magic, and it's kind of fun.
One other thing to add to that, and then I know, Dennis, you have a question. We'll get to you just one second. Something I've found myself, and I love advising when people are interested in learning and becoming more comfortable with food and wine pairing, is a really simple kind of shifting of the paradigm of this concept, and stop trying to pair a wine with your food.
Mm-hmm.
Pick the wine and then build the food around it. The dish that you're going to make is mutable and it can be adjusted. The flavor profiles can be changed based on the seasonings that you're using, et cetera, et cetera. The wine is, I don't want to say static because we were just talking about the way wine evolves, but you can't do anything.
You can't alter it
yourself other than opening it a little bit earlier or later. So pick the wine and then choose the food that you want to enjoy with it, instead of trying to like decide that you're going to have a dish and then from your relatively limited selection of wine at home or even in the grocery store, try to pick the right wine to pair with it.
Yeah.
That's when you have a restaurant with a cellar with 16,000 bottles.
Yeah.
That's not for what you're doing at home. Dennis, let me kick it over to you real quick here because I know that you've had a question there for a little bit.
So the question was pretty simple, is about cold soaking, and to cold soak or not cold soak, or what does that actually mean and how does it make a difference?
Laura, do you guys want to do this or you?
Well, I'll just say that we do ferment kind of low and slow. We're using the native yeast, and basically we're not intentionally cold soaking per se, like we're not chilling it down, but if it does get above a certain temperature and we feel like it's a little too hot, we might bring the temperature down. Likewise, if it's taking too long, we might bring the temperature up. But with the Pinots anyway, we're not cold soaking to extract anything. We're just pretty much putting it in and letting it do its thing. And it's real small scale, so we have a good eye on it, but it's not, we're not, we are not cold soaking.
Well, can I ask, does cold soaking control the fermentation process?
Yeah,
By
what's the purpose of cold soaking?
Went that to Jamie.
Yeah, it does. Totally. Cold soaking, it's you just basically chill stuff down and arrest fermentation. So at 45 degrees or less, there ain't nothing happening there in terms of fermentation. You've got to get to at least into the 50s, upper 50s, lower 60s to get anything kind of tickling around there. But for me, cold soak is, it is a tool. And again, potato. It's just not, there's no one size fits all for sure. But I love it because the wines that I bring in are inherently, higher in sugar. And I do like the indigenous primary and secondary. And so I'm kind of forced into cold soak, man. I don't, if I want to have a snowball's chance in hell of finishing, converting sugars to alcohol at the levels I bring in, then, I've got to do the cold soak, because what the cold soak does in terms of like your palate and flavor profile, it rounds it out. It gives it a richness. It gives it a tannic spectrum, that I enjoy and that I find, wonderful in my own winemaking. But it also allows the organic community, of microbials to build. And so once I do cut it loose and raise the temperature up in the tank, and I do that with the heating element by heating the glycol to about 70 degrees, it really it does a lot of good for my wines. But again, it's a stylistic point, and it's it.
Uh-oh. Did we lose?
Oh, Jamie, where'd you go?
Jamie? We might have lost.
Oh no.
Jamie,
Jamie.
Uh-oh.
Mr. Whetstone.
Uh-oh.
It looks like Jay's gonna have to take over. He
I know.
stood right outside Whetstone.
Jay now has
Dark
access to
side.
Whetstone.
Yeah, so here at Whetstone, we like to get grapes out of the ground and trees.
I love it. That's so cool that you're able to do that so quickly.
They grow in both places, and then we put it in a barrel, and we have a donkey. The donkey's name is Paul, and a great donkey, and he smashes all the grapes and makes them extra tasty.
I love it.
And that's the class and
Yeah,
quality.
Ace is
like the most winningest Instagram hero of the Whetstone.
It's true. That dog has a good life. That dog has a good life.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to be conscious of time because it is 7:30.
That's true.
So Evan and I are always happy to hang out longer and keep drinking and snacking on cheese.
We've still got a few glasses
We're happy.
here.
It's Thursday night. But for those of you who have to take off, we want to thank a huge thanks. I hope Jamie comes back soon.
Maybe he had a hard stop at 7:30.
Exactly.
Oh, maybe that's true.
That's right.
He didn't even realize that he was getting cut off right
Oh,
at the end.
man.
Michelle pulled the plug on his computer. You're done.
But anyone who'd like to stay on and chat with us,
We're
we're
happy
happy to
to.
stick around
Yeah.
while we've still got wine and cheese.
Yeah.
We're amiable to continue to converse.
But we do want to do a
But
big
thank you so
thanks.
much, Laura.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, thank you all for being
Great
here.
having you on. And everyone
sure-
else that showed up as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you
Means
for
so much to
supporting
us.
Whetstone and Carpenter.
Yeah.
If you're inspired by what you heard tonight, please go and purchase some wine from them. Next time you're out on the West Coast and are up in wine country, go visit them. They would love to have you. And as we were speaking about earlier, their hospitality is gorgeous, lovely.
Yeah.
Both of their locations are wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance. I really wanted to ask Jamie about their live music program because
Oh, Addie, maybe you can
Yeah.
talk to the live music program. Can you?
yeah, I would love to hear just, what y'all do over there.
Here, let me find your mute button here.
Uh-oh. All right.
Hold on, I gotcha. There you go.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Hi, Laura. Yeah, so for the live music, we have done several Live in the Vineyard concerts, which comes through town twice a year, now 3 times a year. They added a Live in the Vineyard Goes Country, and that way we've gotten very connected to the live music community. And Jamie and Michelle also donate to the Haight Street Art Center in San Francisco, where they do live chats with musicians, and that's really cool. And Michelle is really good about keeping her finger on the pulse of who's coming through town, and be it an upcoming artist or what have you. She's always trying to lure them in with wine and food, and they're like, hey, don't you want to play some music for us? And you can sleep in our chateau and have a weekend in Napa. So it works out pretty well. We've had a lot of really cool artists play there. We teamed up with K-Fog, and I won't ramble off all the artists, but it's really fun. I encourage you guys to get on our mailing list. We have a beautiful lawn and we have a lot of space, and we look forward to, when this lifts, carefully inviting everybody there to spend some time and sip some wine and have moments. In the summer, it's all out on the lawn, food truck, casual. And in the winter months, we pull everything inside, and it's a little bit more intimate, fireside and ticketed. But really, really worth it. Would love to see you all there. And
So
it's
Addie,
great.
I am envisioning something that just kind of came to my mind because you said you entice these musicians in with wine and food. And Jake Hawkes is a pretty amazing chef. So there could be a potential collaborative effort there.
Wait, who is he in here?
Oh,
He was on there.
he went to go make some dinner.
This guy
Because
won't.
he's
Yeah,
a
we'd love to have you guys. Speaking of being an amazing chef, he had to go cook for you. I appreciate that. Excellent. Yeah, we absolutely look forward to connecting with everybody, especially our neighbors over there at Carpenter. That sounds awesome. We'd love to see you.
Yeah, that's great. And speaking of fun events, just a quick reminder, next week is Mezcal for us.
Yay,
The following week is Summer Sippin' Ciders. So, and then I think we have some more wine coming.
Rye, or was it bourbon?
Bourbon or rye, and then we have a bourbon versus rye one, so we can do a spicy versus sweet. Yeah, we have a lot of fun events coming up. So every Thursday, 6 p.m., be here, be square. We look forward to seeing you at lots of these and helping you stock your home bars with lots of amazing craft makers, spirits and wine and cider and beer and all that good stuff.
All that amazing stuff. And first step, go get some of this amazing Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Go check out Carpenter and
yeah, it's really delicious.
Enjoy what we've been enjoying tonight, because man, oh man, this is delicious stuff.
Had a lot of wine. Had a lot of wine to drink.
Yeah.
Take off. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. We love you. And we'll see you next week.
Till
hopefully.
next time.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.